Have you ever had a moment so shocking, so unexpected that it froze you right where you stood even though everything in you was screaming to move, shout or cry? That was me in my kitchen on an ordinary afternoon while my husband hummed over the stove like nothing in the world was wrong, and then his phone lit up. A message popped onto the screen, bold, bright and bold enough to steal the breath right out of my lungs. It said, "I miss you." I stared at that message and I swear my soul stepped outside my body. My hands were shaking, the room felt smaller, the air heavier, and my heartbeat sounded louder than the sizzling pan behind him. But instead of confronting him right away, instead of exploding like he probably expected, I did something he never saw coming. I replied for him, "Come over." And that moment right there changed everything. I remember the exact moment my breath caught in my throat and the world tilted just enough to make me feel like I was no longer standing on solid ground. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day that feels so peaceful that you never suspect trouble could be hiding in the walls. My husband was in the kitchen cooking, humming softly like he did when he felt relaxed and comfortable. His sleeves were rolled up, his back swayed slightly with the rhythm of a song he probably made up on the spot, and the smell of garlic and onions floated through the house. The sound of the sizzling pan mixed with the soft hum created a scene that looked like a picture of normal life, something warm, something safe, something familiar. I was walking past the counter simply looking for a glass of water when his phone lit up. The screen glowed bright and bold and grabbed my attention before I even had the chance to look away. It was one of those moments where your eyes see something before your brain gives permission, one of those things you cannot unsee because the truth does not wait for permission. The message sat right there on the lock screen, short, simple and sharp like a knife sliding under the skin. It said, "I miss you." Those 3 words hit harder than any scream could have. I felt the air leave my chest like someone had pressed a heavy hand against my ribs. My fingers tightened around the glass I was reaching for, and for a moment I truly forgot how to breathe. It was not because I did not expect betrayal, it was because I had trusted so much that betrayal felt impossible until it was staring me in the face. I looked at him standing there so calm, so unaware of the storm that had just slammed into me. He stirred the pan like life was perfect, like we were perfect, like nothing in the world could shake the ground under us. And as I stared at the back of his head, a strange kind of silence filled me, the kind of silence that is not empty but loud, loud with heartbreak, loud with questions, loud with realization. It felt like every moment of our marriage, every smile, every kiss, every argument, every apology, every plan we had ever made lined up in front of me, waiting for me to make sense of them again through this new painful filter. I wanted to ask him right then. I wanted to say, "Who is missing you? Why is she missing you? Why does she feel close enough to say those words to my husband?" But the question stayed stuck in my throat, stiff, heavy, unmoving. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a fist I could not see, and I kept replaying the words on the screen in my mind. "I miss you." It sounded personal, intimate, familiar. It sounded practiced. It sounded like it was not the first time it had been said. My body felt frozen in place, but inside I was unraveling thread by thread. Every instinct inside me screamed, leave, run, shout, cry, do something, but I did not move. I stood there gripping the counter as if it could keep me grounded, as if the solid surface could keep my heart from collapsing in on itself. And in that moment I realized something that shook me deeper than the message itself. It was the feeling that this was not new, that this was not sudden, that this was simply the first time the truth had stepped out into the open instead of hiding behind shadows and excuses. I looked closer at his phone and it felt like the screen was burning my eyes. The message sat there, innocent in form but heavy with implication. It carried the weight of late nights and changed moods and unexplained absences. It carried the weight of all those moments when I felt like something was wrong but convinced myself I was imagining things. I replayed all the times he brushed off my concerns with soft words and warm hugs, and now I wondered if those were real or rehearsed. My throat felt dry and my stomach twisted like it was trying to fold itself in half. I walked a few steps away from the counter and leaned against the wall because suddenly standing felt too difficult. The world around me was the same, but nothing inside me was familiar anymore. I glanced at him again, wondering how he could look so peaceful when my whole world was cracking like fragile glass. What kind of man cooks dinner for his wife while another woman sends him messages filled with longing? What kind of man stands there humming as if he has not planted a seed of heartbreak in the heart of the woman who loved him the most? I felt waves of confusion wash over me, first disorientation, then disbelief, then anger, then a sadness so deep it felt like it lived inside my bones. My mind jumped from thought to thought, trying to make sense of something senseless. Why did she miss him? What had he given her? What had they shared? What had he taken from me behind my back? Why had he let this happen? And how long had I been living in a reality that did not match the truth? I wanted to crumble, but I would not give him that. I would not let him turn around and find me small, broken and trembling, not after everything I had poured into that marriage, not after all the times I had stood by his side when life got heavy, not after all the times I held his fears, protected his dreams and lifted him when he felt low, while he had offered parts of himself to someone else behind my back, someone who had the nerve to say I miss you like she owned space in his life. I straightened myself up even though my legs felt like they were made of paper. My heart thudded in slow, painful beats and my palms grew sweaty as I picked up his phone. I stared at that message again, wanting to absorb every ounce of truth it was offering, because that message was not just a sentence, it was a confession, it was evidence, it was a doorway into a world I never wanted to enter. My mind began to sharpen like a blade, clearing away the fog of shock, revealing something colder than anger and steadier than fear. A new voice rose inside me, a voice that was tired of being quiet, a voice that understood that betrayal demands clarity, not chaos. I felt the heat in my chest settle into a cold determination, a feeling that said if he had opened the door to another life, then I would not close my eyes to it anymore. I lifted the phone and with trembling fingers I typed the words "come over." I pressed send before I could think twice, before doubt could creep in, before fear could drag me back into silence. And as soon as the message delivered, I knew I had changed the course of everything. I knew there was no turning back, because inviting her was not about welcoming her, it was about welcoming the truth. It was about forcing the hidden into the light. It was about making sure that the lies he built would finally collapse right in front of him. I stood there holding his phone, feeling the weight of what I had just done, and for the first time since the message appeared I felt something powerful rise within me, not relief, not victory, but strength, the kind of strength that grows in the heart of a woman who has finally stopped pretending, who has finally stopped doubting, who has finally stopped carrying a one-sided love, a strength that whispered to me, you are not the weak one here, you are the one finally opening your eyes. The message "I miss you" might have broken something inside me, but the message I sent "come over" awakened something in me too. It awakened the woman who would not be lied to, who would not be played, who would not be kept in the dark. And in that moment I knew that whatever happened next, whatever truth came through that door, I would face it not as a woman defeated, but as a woman ready for the truth, ready for answers, ready for the consequences, ready for the next chapter of her life, even if that chapter required heartbreak to write it. When I think back to that moment when the text message flashed across the screen and I saw those words glowing like a warning sign, I remember the strange mix of heat and cold rushing through me. It was like my body could not decide if it wanted to freeze in place or burn with anger, and yet I stood there pretending nothing had happened, because that is what years of keeping the peace had taught me to do. But once I sent that message telling her to come over, I knew there was no turning back. And as the minutes ticked by, something inside me shifted in a way I had never allowed before. I started watching him closely, really watching him as he cooked, standing there all calm and comfortable like everything in our life was normal, and I realized something painful. I had been living in a half-truth. I had been accepting crumbs and pretending it was a full meal. I had been swallowing tears, smiling through hurt and dimming parts of myself just to maintain a picture that was pretty only from the outside. As I leaned against the counter pretending to check my phone, I studied him. The way he moved, the way he hummed, the way he tossed ingredients into the pan without a single thought that maybe his wife was standing just a few feet away, questioning the entire foundation of their marriage. He had no idea what storm was approaching. He had no clue that the very woman he was texting behind my back thought she could stroll into my home without consequences. And he certainly had no idea that the woman he believed would stay quiet forever had finally found her voice. It is strange what betrayal does to a person. At first it makes you feel small, like someone pulled the ground from under you and you have to scramble to find anything to hold on to. But then another part of you, the part that has been ignored and silenced and pushed aside, begins to rise up. I could feel that part of me awakening as I watched him stir the pot, as if he were stirring the pot of my entire life. I began replaying moments in my mind, the late nights, the changed passwords, the vague explanations, the times he guarded his phone like it held national secrets. I remembered how many times my intuition whispered to me and how many times I shoved it aside because I wanted to believe in the man I loved. I wanted stability, peace, routine. I wanted to believe that loyalty meant the same thing to him that it meant to me. But there is a moment when denial becomes impossible. A moment when your eyes open so wide that you cannot close them again. That text was that moment for me. And even though I was angry, even though I felt betrayed, even though I felt the sting of humiliation in my chest, I also felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. And clarity felt like power. For the first time I was not the one being blindsided. I was not the one being kept in the dark. I was not the one waiting. I knew something he did not know. I held knowledge, and that knowledge gave me the strength to stand tall even though my heart was breaking. As he chopped vegetables with that same easy rhythm he always had, I thought about all the times I had shrunk myself to avoid conflict. The times I had apologized first even when I was the one hurt. The times I had taken responsibility for things that were not mine to carry. I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who loved deeply and gave generously and trusted fully. And then I thought about the woman I was becoming in that very moment. A woman who refused to be walked over. A woman who refused to be treated like an option. A woman who refused to let someone else rewrite her worth. The minutes after I sent that text message stretched out like hours. Every sound felt louder. Every movement felt sharper. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping like a drum inside my chest. I kept glancing toward the window, expecting headlights at any moment. Part of me wanted her to show up so I could finally see the truth face to face. Another part of me wanted her to stay far away because I knew once she stepped onto that porch nothing in my life would ever be the same again. But more than anything, in those long heavy minutes I started seeing my husband differently. It was like a fog lifted from my eyes. I saw the selfishness I had ignored for years. I saw the disrespect I had forgiven too many times. I saw the ease with which he lived his double life. And most importantly, I saw the gap between how much I loved him and how little he valued that love. That realization hit me harder than the message itself, because betrayal is not just about the act. It is about everything that act reveals. I started asking myself questions I had avoided. Why had I carried the emotional load of the marriage alone? Why had I allowed myself to believe I did not deserve better? Why had I stayed quiet every time my instinct screamed something was wrong? Why did I fight for a man who could not even fight the urge to text another woman, "I miss you"? And the answer came slowly but clearly. I was conditioned to be strong, patient, forgiving, accommodating. But strength without boundaries becomes weakness. Patience without reciprocity becomes self-sabotage. Forgiveness without change becomes acceptance of pain. As I stood there watching him sprinkle spices over the pan, I felt something inside me untangle. A knot I had held for too long loosened. A breath I did not know I was holding escaped me. I realized I was done being the quiet, loyal wife who endured everything in silence. I was done pretending my marriage was stable when the foundation had been cracking for years. I was done placing loyalty above self-respect. And in that shift I discovered something precious. My dignity, my power, my voice. I did not say anything to him in that moment. I did not yell. I did not accuse. I simply observed. Because sometimes silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the gathering of strength before the final strike. And I was gathering all the strength I had spent years giving away. I watched him smile at me unsuspecting, and I felt something unexpected. Not longing, not fear, not desperation. I felt distance. Emotional distance. The kind that reveals the truth. The kind that shows you the difference between loving someone and losing yourself. And for the first time I chose myself. Quietly, steadily, powerfully. And while he stood there thinking dinner was the only thing simmering in that kitchen, I knew a reckoning was coming. A reckoning he never saw coming. A reckoning I was finally ready for. The moment the doorbell rang, my whole body jolted like someone had snapped their fingers right in front of my soul. It was a sharp sound, one I had heard a million times before, yet this time it felt different, heavier, more charged. It echoed through the house like a warning, like a countdown reaching zero. He looked up confused because we were not expecting anyone, or at least he was not. And in that instant I saw the first flicker of unease cross his face. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but I caught it. Because when you love someone deeply you learn to read them with the precision of a surgeon. Every twitch, every blink, every forced smile becomes a letter in a language only you can understand. I remember the way he froze for half a second, spatula held mid-air, steam rising around him like a cloud trying to hide the truth. And then he said something ordinary like, "Who could that be?" but the tone of his voice betrayed him. It wavered just a little, and that little tremor told me everything I needed to know. He was nervous. He was scared. He was trying to keep his composure, but inside he was scrambling. And watching him fall apart in real time without understanding why gave me a strange sense of calm. I wiped my hands on a towel as slowly as I could, dragging out every second because I wanted him to feel that pressure building. I wanted him to feel the weight of a secret no longer safe. The walk to the door felt long, like the hallway had stretched itself just to give him time to think, to panic, to wonder. And I knew the moment I opened that door our marriage would step into a place it could never walk back from. But I also knew I deserved truth even if it burned. When I finally reached the door, I took a deep breath, not to steady myself but to release the last bit of fear clinging to me. Fear had controlled me long enough. And then I pulled the door open and there she was, standing on my porch, smiling, wearing perfume thick enough to announce her half a block away. She had the nerve to look excited, like she was arriving for a surprise party, like she was stepping into a story where she believed she was the main character. Her eyes flicked behind me, quickly searching, hoping to see him. And something inside me hardened. Because in that glance I saw entitlement. I saw audacity. I saw a woman who thought she had a claim on what she never earned. She opened her mouth to say something like "Hey," or "I am here," or whatever line she had prepared, but I cut her off with one long slow look. Not angry, not loud, not dramatic. Just a look that said, "I know exactly who you are and you have no idea who I am becoming." Behind me I heard footsteps. He was coming, and I could almost feel his fear pushing the air before him. When he reached the doorway and saw her, his entire face drained of color so fast it almost fascinated me. His mouth opened soundless, his eyes widened. He looked like a child caught stealing but still trying to figure out how to deny it. She looked at him with this soft, needy expression, and all I could think was how foolish they both were. How reckless, how careless. How willing they were to risk my heart, my trust, my stability for something so flimsy. The silence between the three of us thickened. It felt like the air turned solid, like everything was suspended in one fragile moment that could shatter with a single word. And he was the first to break. He whispered her name, quiet, guilty, trembling, and hearing him say her name like that, like it was familiar, like it belonged in his mouth, made something deep inside me crack. Not a loud break. A soft one, the kind that comes from too many hurts piled on top of each other until the weight becomes unbearable. She stepped forward like she thought this moment was about the two of them, and I held up one hand, stopping her without touching her. Power does not always need volume. Sometimes it is held in stillness, in posture, in the unspoken message you deliver when you refuse to be intimidated. And she froze because she felt that message. I turned to him slowly, letting the silence stretch because I wanted him to feel all of it. I wanted him to feel every second of tension, every second of discomfort, every second of dread, knowing he had invited this chaos into our home through his choices. He stuttered, trying to form a story, an excuse, a plea, something to soften the blow. But I did not want softness. I wanted truth, raw, unfiltered, exposed. I asked him one question. Not why, not how long, not what does she mean to you. Just one simple, piercing question. Does she know she is walking into our home, or did she think she was walking into yours? That question hit him like a slap, and it hit her like a revelation. She turned her head toward him slowly, like a door creaking open in a horror movie, and the expression on her face shifted from confidence to confusion, then to realization. She probably thought I was the roommate, the cousin, the sister, anyone other than the wife he had embroidered into his lies. The silence after that question felt different. It was no longer heavy. It was sharp, cutting, and it sliced through every lie like a hot blade. He tried to speak again, voice shaking, trying to piece together something believable, but the truth was already in the air, and it was not going back in his pocket. He had been caught, completely, unequivocally, publicly. She stepped back like she wanted to escape the embarrassment spilling around her, but embarrassment was the least of what she deserved. She looked between us, realizing she was standing in the wreckage she helped create, and for the first time she did not look excited. She looked foolish, lost, small. I did not yell at her. I did not insult her. I did not act like she had stolen something from me, because the truth is, no one can steal a man who does not walk out willingly. Instead, I looked her in the eye and thanked her. Because without that text, without her boldness, without her arrogance, I might have continued living in a lie, thinking loyalty could fix a foundation that was already broken. She helped me see the truth. Painful, yes, but freeing. Her eyes widened because she did not expect that. She took another step back toward her car, suddenly desperate to leave, to run from the truth that no longer benefited her. And when she did, I let her go. She was not my problem. She never was. My problem stood behind me, shaking because he knew my silence held more power than any shouting match ever could. I closed the door slowly, letting the sound echo through the house like a final curtain dropping on a play that had lasted far too long. He tried to speak, but I walked right past him because at that moment he no longer deserved the privilege of my attention. I needed space. I needed clarity. And I needed to let the reality of what had just happened carve its way into my mind so I could make decisions from strength, not pain. As I walked away, I realized something profound. This was not just betrayal. This was awakening. And nothing would ever be the same again. When I stepped away from him and walked down that hallway, it felt like each step separated me from the woman I used to be. The hallway was short, only a handful of paces from the front door to the living room, but that distance felt like years of suppressed pain unfolding beneath my feet. I could hear him behind me calling my name in that soft, guilty tone people use only when they know they have been caught, completely stripped of excuses. But I did not turn around. Not because I was trying to punish him, though he deserved that and more, but because I needed a moment where I was not reacting to him. For too long my emotions had revolved around his actions, his moods, his choices. This time I needed to breathe in a space where his presence held no power. I sat down on the edge of the couch and placed my hands on my knees, feeling them shake slightly, not from fear but from the shock of truth finally breaking through the fog. The house was quiet except for his hesitant footsteps and the faint sizzling from the forgotten pan on the stove. Even the air felt different, like the walls themselves had witnessed what just happened and were holding their breath. I stared at the floor, not at him, not at the doorway, but at the floor, because sometimes when you are hurting, the smallest, simplest thing in front of you becomes the only stable point you can focus on. He walked into the room slowly, like a man approaching a cliff, trying to decide if jumping might be safer than staying still. He whispered my name again, almost like a question, like he was checking if I was still capable of hearing him or if the betrayal had severed that connection entirely. I did not respond, and that silence weighed on him so heavily I could feel it through the tension in the air. He sat down across from me, leaving a respectful distance only because he knew anything else would be dangerous. I could feel him searching for something to say, something that might soften the blow, but he had no words strong enough to bridge the gap he had created. After a long pause he started talking. His voice was shaky, stumbling over half-formed explanations because he did not know which lie to choose and which truth to reveal. He talked about stress and misunderstandings and how things got out of hand, but none of that mattered. I sat there listening to the sounds, not the words, because betrayal has a strange effect. Once you see the truth, everything else becomes background noise. His voice faded in and out like static on a broken radio. He kept reaching for reasons, reaching for sympathy, reaching for a version of events that made him seem less guilty, and I let him speak because I needed to hear the desperation in his voice. I needed to feel his fear, not because it brought me satisfaction but because it confirmed what I already knew. He had made choices that destroyed something priceless, and now he was scrambling to gather the pieces, knowing full well they might cut him in the process. Finally I lifted my head and looked at him. Really looked at him. And it amazed me how different he seemed. This was the same man I had built a life with, the same man I cooked for, laughed with, cried with, supported through storms, yet he felt like a stranger. A stranger who had worn my husband like a mask. And watching him struggle to explain something that had no explanation, I felt something inside me harden. Betrayal is not just the breaking of trust. It is the breaking of illusion. And once the illusion is broken, the truth stands naked and undeniable. I asked him one question. One simple question. Why did you let her think she had a chance? He froze. Everything inside him went still. His eyes darted around like he was searching for an answer, but there was none. He knew it. I knew it. And the silence after that question was more revealing than anything he could have said. Because men who cheat do not always fall in love with someone else. Sometimes they fall in love with the version of themselves they get to be in that secret space, the version without responsibility, without expectations, without accountability. And admitting that would mean admitting he had chosen selfishness over love. He ran his hands through his hair, whispering that he never meant for it to go this far. And that sentence pierced me because it was not comforting. It was insulting, as if the betrayal itself was accidental, as if his choices had not been deliberate, as if the text messages, the secrecy, the flirting, the emotional intimacy was something that just happened without his participation. I looked at him and said something I never imagined I would say. "You may not have meant to fall, but you kept climbing." And in that moment he broke. Shoulders slumped, breathing unsteady, eyes filled with regret that came far too late. He moved forward like he wanted to touch my hand or reach for me, but I pulled my hand back, and that small movement sent a shockwave through him. It reminded him that access to my heart was no longer free. That every boundary he had once crossed so easily was now a wall he could not touch. And seeing the understanding wash over him, a part of me felt both sad and empowered. Sad because I had never wanted to build walls between us. Empowered because I finally realized I had the right to. He whispered apologies over and over, each one softer, more desperate, more raw. But apologies can only mend what honesty can heal, and honesty had been missing for far too long. I told him I needed the truth, without filters, without excuses, without performance. He swallowed hard and tried to offer bits and pieces, but I cut him off gently, firmly, clearly. I told him truth is not something you sprinkle like seasoning over a lie. Truth stands alone, or it does not stand at all. The more he talked, the more I began to understand how deep his detachment had gone. He had built a second emotional world with someone else while expecting me to hold up the weight of the real one. He had allowed someone outside our home to feel closer to him than the woman inside it. And he did it not because he lacked love, but because he lacked courage. Courage to communicate. Courage to confront his own shortcomings. Courage to admit that he was lonely even in a marriage filled with effort. Courage to grow instead of escape. When he finally ran out of words, the room fell silent again. A long, heavy silence that stretched across the space between us like a river too wide to cross. And in that silence I felt the shift. The realization that something inside me had fundamentally changed. I was no longer begging for answers. I was no longer waiting for him to prove something. I was no longer afraid of the truth. I was finally facing it with my head held high. I stood up slowly, and the moment I did, his eyes filled with panic because he could sense the change in the air. I told him I needed space, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed to hear my own voice above the echoes of his. I needed to decide what kind of life I wanted moving forward, one built on broken promises or one built on self-respect. And without waiting for his response, I walked away from him again, this time not to escape but to reclaim myself. That was the moment I realized I was no longer the same woman who had opened the door minutes earlier. I was stronger, clearer, and more awake than ever before. Walking into the bedroom felt like stepping into a sanctuary that had suddenly turned unfamiliar. It was the same room with the same walls, the same bed, the same photographs on the dresser, yet nothing felt like it belonged to me anymore. Betrayal does that. It rearranges the air. It shifts the energy. It changes the meaning of everything you once saw as safety. I closed the door behind me, not slamming it, not locking it, just closing it softly because I needed silence. Not the empty kind, but the kind that gives you space to hear your own heartbeat and listen to the parts of yourself you have ignored for too long. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my reflection in the mirror across the room. At first I saw myself the way I always had. The woman who made sacrifices, the woman who believed in loyalty, the woman who kept giving chances because she thought that was what love required. But as the minutes passed, my reflection shifted. I saw a woman who had carried more weight than she should have. A woman who had forgiven more than she admitted. A woman tired not in her bones but in her spirit. And beneath all that exhaustion I saw another woman rising. One who refused to be broken even when everything around her fell apart. The tears did not come right away. People think betrayal brings instant emotion, but it does not. It brings shock first. Disbelief. Numbness. Your mind tries to catch up with what your heart already knows. So I sat there, not crying, not yelling, not shaking, just breathing slowly, trying to understand how a single moment could rewrite an entire relationship. I tried to piece together the timeline, the signs, the shifts, the excuses. I tried to remember the moments I pushed aside my intuition to keep the peace. But most of all, I tried to figure out when I lost myself in the process of loving a man who had no idea how to love me back fully. After what felt like hours, though it had only been minutes, the dam inside me cracked. The tears came silently at first, sliding down my face like warm reminders that I was human and hurting. I let them fall. I did not wipe them away. I did not hide from them. I let the pain flow because holding it in had done enough damage already. And as I cried, something strange happened. I did not feel weak. I felt release. Truth is a heavy weight, and once it drops it hurts, but it also liberates. I curled up on the bed, hugging a pillow to my chest, trying to breathe through the ache spreading through me like slow burning fire. Memories flooded my mind. Every anniversary, every shared laugh, every late night conversation, every quiet moment where I had believed we were building something real. And alongside those memories came the darker ones, the ones I had shoved away. The cancelled plans, the secrecy with his phone, the sudden distance, the lack of effort, the nights he seemed present but not connected. Those memories mixed together like water and oil, refusing to blend because they did not belong to the same truth. For a long time I thought about walking out the front door, leaving everything behind and never looking back. I imagined packing a suitcase, driving away, blasting music that drowned out his apologies. I imagined walking into a new life with a new identity, free from heartbreak, free from disappointment, free from the weight of loving someone who did not value loyalty. But as freeing as that fantasy was, I knew I needed more than escape. I needed understanding. I needed closure. And most importantly, I needed a decision that came from strength, not from fear. As I lay there, I realized something important. Betrayal does not just show you the truth about another person. It shows you the truth about yourself. It shows you what you have tolerated, what you have ignored, what you have lost, and what you need to reclaim. I realized I had made myself small so the relationship could feel big. I had given him grace without receiving accountability. I had dismissed my needs because I thought being low maintenance made me lovable. But love is not measured by how much you endure. Love is measured by how much both people show up. And I had been showing up alone. A soft knock at the door broke through my thoughts. His voice cracked through the wood, barely above a whisper, asking if he could come in. I did not answer right away because I needed to breathe before facing him again. When I finally said yes, my voice sounded different even to me. It sounded controlled, steady, detached. He walked in slowly, like he was entering a room filled with broken glass, afraid to step anywhere without causing more damage. His eyes were swollen, his face pale, his whole posture bent like the weight of guilt was pushing down on him. He sat on the floor in front of me instead of on the bed. That surprised me. Maybe he thought sitting lower would soften the tension, maybe he wanted to show humility, maybe he simply did not trust himself to be too close. He looked up at me and I could see he had been crying too, but his tears did not heal me. They did not erase the hurt. They did not rebuild the trust. Instead, they revealed something I had not expected. He was not just guilty. He was lost. Lost in choices he never had the courage to stop. Lost in desires he never examined. Lost in the comfort of attention that fed his ego while starving his integrity. He started talking again, but this time I held up my hand and told him to stop. I told him I did not want excuses. I did not want a timeline. I did not want the watered-down version of his wrongdoing. I wanted the truth. The full truth. The truth he never thought I would hear. And I warned him that once he spoke there was no taking it back. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since everything exploded he looked terrified. Not of losing the other woman. Not of being caught. But of losing me. As he began to talk, I listened carefully, not just to the words but to the spaces between them. I listened to the shame in his voice, the self-loathing, the regret, the confusion. He spoke about feeling disconnected, overwhelmed, unnoticed, not because I had failed him but because he had failed himself. He admitted he liked the attention because it made him feel powerful, special, wanted. He admitted he flirted because he wanted to feel young again, desirable, important. He admitted he crossed lines because he believed he would never get caught and because he thought I would always be there no matter what. And hearing that broke something inside me far deeper than the betrayal itself. Not because it hurt me but because it clarified everything I needed to know. He had not betrayed me because I was lacking. He had betrayed me because he was lacking. He had not sought another woman because I was not enough. He sought her because he was too weak to face himself. And that realization washed over me like an unexpected wave. Painful, yes, but cleansing. When he finished talking, the room fell silent again. I looked at him and for the first time since everything happened I felt clarity. A calm, powerful clarity that comes when you stop fighting the truth and finally accept it. And in that moment I knew something important. Whether I stayed or walked away, whether we repaired or dismantled, whether we rebuilt or burned it all down, I would no longer be the woman who carried the emotional labor alone. I would no longer apologize for needing loyalty, honesty, consistency. I would no longer shrink to make space for someone who did not know how to stay. For the first time I felt the ground beneath me solid even in the midst of chaos. And I knew that whatever came next would be my choice, not his. When the door finally closed behind her and her footsteps faded down the walkway, I stood in the middle of that kitchen feeling like every breath I took was heavier than the one before, and my husband just stood there watching me like a man waiting for a verdict he already knew would not go in his favor. And I remember thinking that silence should not hurt this much, but it did, because silence was where the truth lived and he had run out of places to hide it. I did not shout, not because I was calm, but because my anger had settled into something sharper, a kind of clarity that felt like ice in my veins. And he kept saying my name over and over, but each time he said it I felt myself detach just a little more, like his voice came from a place I no longer recognized, and he tried to explain what happened with words that tangled together and fell apart before they ever reached me. And he kept insisting it was innocent, it was not what it looked like. He did not know why she texted that, he did not reply, he did not do anything. But when someone you love has already broken the invisible thread of trust, that explanation sounds like excuses, and excuses are just desperation wearing cheap perfume. And I could smell every lie on him, even the ones he had not spoken yet. So I told him to sit down, and he did, because guilt has a way of weakening the knees. And I asked one question, the question that had been burning since the moment I saw the message, and it was not why did she text you, and it was not do you love her, and it was not have you cheated. I asked him something far simpler and far more devastating. I asked, when exactly did you stop choosing me, because messages do not appear out of nowhere, and emotional drift does not happen in a vacuum, and people do not receive I miss you unless they have made space for someone to think their presence is welcome. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then tried again, and all he could offer was I never stopped choosing you, which sounded like something he wanted to believe more than something that was true. I watched him crumble under the weight of his own contradictions, and I felt nothing, and that absence of pain was somehow scarier because it meant the part of me that used to ache for him had already started shutting down. But I knew the next steps were not about punishing him and not about proving I was right, they were about reclaiming myself, because betrayal, even emotional betrayal, even almost betrayal, has a way of shrinking a person, and I refused to live small. So I stood up and walked out of that kitchen, leaving him there with the mess he created, and I drove because movement felt like survival, and I did not stop until I reached the one place that had always grounded me, Auntie May's porch with its old wood and rocking chairs and weathered wisdom. She took one look at me and said, "Baby, sit down, you look like your soul needs a minute," and before I could even begin to explain, she placed a warm mug in my hands and said, "Speak only when your breath stops shaking." And for a long time I just sat there listening to the night, listening to myself unravel and stitch back together at the same time. When I finally told her everything, she listened without interrupting, and when I finished she did not offer comfort, she offered clarity, and she said something I will never forget. She said, "Child, the moment someone allows another person to imagine a place in their life that belongs to you, they have already opened a door that must be closed from the inside, and only he can close it, but only you can decide if he deserves another chance to stand behind it." And suddenly the path forward did not feel tangled or confusing, it felt like a choice, one that I needed to make for myself, not for him, not for the marriage, not for the fear of starting over, but for me. So I went home, not to forgive, not to fight, but to state my terms, because a relationship cannot be rebuilt on the foundation of crumbs and hoping someone will treat you better tomorrow. And when I walked through the door, he stood up like he had been waiting for hours, afraid I would not return, and I told him calmly that things would not continue as they were, that trust was not reset by tears or promises or empty declarations, that rebuilding required transparency, consistency, discomfort, effort, changes that were real, not performed, and if he was not ready to do all of that, then the door behind me was still open. He nodded slowly, as though every word landed on him with the force of truth he could no longer run from, and I told him we would go to counseling, not as a gesture, not as a bandage, but as a mandatory step, and I told him communication would not be optional anymore, and I told him that he would need to show, not tell, because words meant nothing without actions that matched them. And over the weeks that followed, he did the work, not perfectly, not gracefully, but consistently. He showed up, he listened, he answered uncomfortable questions, he faced the parts of himself he had avoided, and while some days were painful, others gave me glimpses of possibility. I did not love him the same way I used to. That version of love had been dented, but what grew in its place was a quieter, sturdier form, something that included boundaries and self-respect and a willingness to walk away if ever necessary. And slowly I realized that the real victory was not keeping the marriage, it was reclaiming the power I thought I had lost. The moment I read that message, because betrayal does not define you, it reveals you to yourself, and I discovered that I was stronger than shock, stronger than hurt, stronger than fear. In the end, key point 6 was never about whether we stayed together, it was about who I became after the moment that could have broken me and did not. It was about standing up in the wreckage and choosing myself first, and then choosing whether anything else was worth rebuilding. And when I look at him now, I no longer worry about someone texting him or someone testing boundaries, because I know I will never again be the woman who waits silently wondering if she is enough. I am the woman who walked through the fire, returned with her own voice, and demanded a relationship built on truth, not illusions. And if anyone ever thinks they can shake that foundation again, they will realize quickly that I do not lose myself in the process of loving someone. Not anymore.